Welcome to the historic City Opera House. My name's Jill Tewsley, and I'm with the National Writers Series. And on behalf of everyone at the National Writers Series, I want to welcome you to an evening in conversation with Sara Paretsky. I also want to tell you that the Writers Series of Traverse City is made possible thanks to the support of our sustaining sponsor, the FIM Group, fee-only wealth managers located downtown. They have been a sponsor of the Writers Series since we began in 2009. Thanks as well to Smith Hoey Rice and Rogie, a major sponsor of the National Writers Series. Now, in addition to being a sustaining sponsor, the FIM Group will donate 20% of the total book sales this evening, as they do at all events, back to the Writers Series of Traverse City. And Horizon Books, the official bookseller of the National Writers Series, will also contribute 20% of their book sales back to the National Writers Series. Others, yep. It's important to have them do things such as that because that money helps to support our scholarship program, which awards 3 scholarships every year. And by the end of this academic school year, we will have awarded nearly $30,000 in scholarships. Other sponsors of the National Writers Series include Dr. Gum and his associates at Traverse City I, Cherry Capital Airport, and our transportation sponsor, Cherry Capital Subaru Cadillac. Thank you. Elizabeth Kane Buzzelli is a writing instructor and the author of novels, short stories, articles, and essays. Her works have appeared in numerous publications and anthologies. She resides here in northern Michigan and is a member of the Mystery Writers of America, which makes her uniquely qualified to introduce tonight's National Writers Series guests. So please join me in welcoming the fabulous Elizabeth Buzzelli.
Welcome to the Chicago night at the Traverse City Opera House. Our guest host for an evening in conversation with Sara Paretsky is Nancy Baker. Nancy is the program director of Evanston Scholars in Evanston, Illinois, but she also lives in Elk Rapids, and she has really taken to life here in Michigan. Now a National Writers Series board member, Nancy served as volunteer coordinator and director of communications for the Traverse City Film Festival for 8 years. With a background as a Chicago English teacher, she went on to a very, very successful career in the corporate world. Nancy calls herself a lover of all things literary and a superbook geek. And now to our other Chicagoan. In 1982, I read a book by a new writer, one Sara Paretsky. It was called Indemnity Only and introduced V.I Warshawski, a very different kind of PI. With that book, my mind was twisted from the accepted that women in mysteries were there either to hop in bed or to play dead, to the unthinkable that a private investigator could be a woman, real, good, bad, and tough, could care deeply about social issues, and didn't have to worry about having her floors redone as they dragged the bodies out, or getting the blood out of her white towels. V.I Warshawski is a womanly woman. She can be wearing a party dress and high heels at 1 minute, and the next she's rolling in the mud of a bleak cemetery to protect a group of teenage girls. V.I. set all women mystery writers free to take on the boys, to put women at the center of the action. V.I. in the series Paretsky has perfected to a high place in literary genre writing. Might be trapped in a locked cellar with a long dead body, but by God, she's also discovering how crimes going back to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, as in her current novel, Critical Mass, how those impact on the present. After living through a difficult childhood in Kansas with brilliant but troubled parents, Paretsky was drawn to causes of the disadvantaged and those fighting for equality. While at the University of Kansas, she chaired the school's first commission on the status of women. In 1966, she was a community organizer during the race riots in Chicago, and she served with Barack Obama on the board which sees to Chicago's mentally ill homeless. She brought that kind of passion to the causes of women mystery writers. In 1986, she created a worldwide organization called Sisters in Crime, which highlights the inequalities in publishing when it comes to books by women writers versus men. Sisters in Crime alerted women to how few of their books are reviewed in comparison to those by men. Reviews mean placement in bookstores. Reviews mean longevity of your books on the bookshelves. Reviews beget reviews and therefore attention. Recently, Sisters in Crime ran a story about a University of Toronto professor who proclaimed in an interview that he only taught very good fiction, and therefore there would be no women writers in his class. I won't give his name because I immediately follow it with swear words. Paretsky has been awarded the Cartier Diamond Dagger for Lifetime Achievement by the British crime writers. Her novel Blacklist won the Gold Dagger for Best Novel of 2004. Today, Sara Paretsky's many books are published in 30 countries. The New York Times said of Sara Paretsky, "She always makes the top of the list when people talk about female operatives." Publishers Weekly says, "Among today's PIs, nobody comes close to Warshawski, and nobody comes close to Sara Paretsky." Please welcome Nancy Baker and Sara Paretsky.
Thank you so much. That was extremely generous and a little over the top. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening. So, Sara, here we are at the City Opera House. So I was out and about today, and I saw the city, and I can see the house, but where is the opera?
I am not getting up.
I think you need to.
Ooh, lost that. And you can remember the rest yourselves.
Hey, bravo! Wow. Well, it's nice to have a plan B, isn't it, if that author thing doesn't work out? So this is not your first trip up north, is it?
I used to come here when my husband and I got married in 1976, and I wanted a bicentennial wedding, and he refused. I don't know why. I was imagining red, white, and blue toilet paper and party favors and so on. But anyway, we had 3 days after the wedding before he had to get back to work, and we drove up and spent those days in Glen Arbor, and then we started coming up here every summer for a while with our golden retriever, which we could stay at the Park Place Hotel where I am staying tonight. They would let us have our golden retriever there, so I have many happy memories of this part of the country.
And did the golden retriever also play a role in your first book?
The golden retriever, V.I gets a golden retriever in the 4th book in the series. And I was not a dog liker when I was young, but I married into a family of dog lovers, and the golden retriever was one that was supposed to be with us for a year and ended up, it was a rescue dog being with us for the rest of her life. But I had had a good friend who had a golden named Peppy, And they so doted on that dog, and I thought, oh, you people, you're just so disgusting, doting on that dog. And so I don't know if I can say this on this stage, but I used to make fun of them and call the dog Dear Crappy. Which I'm so ashamed of this memory. But so when V.I. got her dog in the 4th book, I felt I really had to make amends to Princess Scheherazade of DuPage, a.k.a. Peppy, named V.I.'s dog Princess Scheherazade of DuPage, and a.k.a. Peppy.
Well, did Peppy figure prominently somehow in a photograph of a book?
When our first dog, our rescue Golden, whom we got when she was 5, her name was Capo. And my husband and I, in addition to coming to Traverse City, we often also used to make a drive around Lake Superior. And one day I was skinny dipping in Lake Superior, just showing off with the dog. And Courtney thought that was really worth a photograph. So I grabbed a shirt and put it on and then grabbed the dog. So I'm standing like this with the dog. And that is actually my author photo in my first book.
That is for sale in the lobby. Everyone wants to go see that photo now.
And that will be my 3rd career.
Well, we both love Chicago. I live there most of the year, and in your books you have Wrigley Field, Lakeshore Drive, Hyde Park, even Dead Stick Pond, which is a real place. Is Chicago almost a character?
Chicago feels very vivid to me in that particular way. I came in the summer of '66 and was working in a youth program with sort of soft propaganda to try to persuade kids that diversity could include something besides rocks. And we would take them, many of them, Chicago, I'm sure many people here know the city well. It's a very parochial city in a way. People live in their neighborhoods. I'm not sure it's so true now as it was 40 years ago. But we had kids who had never been out of their neighborhood, even to see the Christmas store windows downtown. So just getting them on the L, taking them places, it was an adventure. And they'd come back to the church basement where we had our program, and we'd say, "What did you see?" And we expected them to talk about the high-rises or, things that were unusual, but what they saw was close-up. They saw drunks on the roof, they saw foxes running alongside the L tracks, and that kind of made a permanent impression on me to see the city with that eye, that close-up eye. And so I guess that's why it's so vivid and real to me.
Do you think your books could be set anywhere else?
My books, V.I. is definitely a shot and a beer kind of person. I don't imagine her in New York or San Francisco. In New York, it's a ruthless and cutthroat town, but it's ruthless and cutthroat in a very sort of, they kill you while you don't even know it's happening. And I don't think she would, I don't want to say she wouldn't survive there. I think she would just start getting out her RPG way too many times.
Well, is there anyone near the front, it's hard to see, who hasn't been to Chicago in maybe 5 years? Anyone? Shout out your name if you haven't been to Chicago in, say, 5 years. Rebecca. Okay, Rebecca. So, Rebecca, let's just say, is coming to Chicago next week, and she's got 24 hours to be there. What would you tell Rebecca she has to do that day? And most importantly, where would she have to eat?
Okay. First of all, Rebecca, if you've never taken the architectural boat tour, it's just such a great way to see Chicago's architecture and the changes that have been made in the city since you were last there or if you were never there. And you can do it sitting down, which I think is always a good way to take a tour of any place. I loved going down. To me, the Dead Stick Pond, which Nancy briefly mentioned, you don't want to go in the South Side neighborhoods now. They're very unstable. A lot of new gangs have moved in, and it's not so safe. But Dead Stick Pond, 122nd and Stony Island Avenue. I think it says everything about Chicago. It's the last marshlands that still exist in the city limits. You can see migratory birds, herons, all kinds of water birds there. Right next to it, Waste Management is doing illegal dumping. They have mob ties, and so you can, if you're lucky, you can see a confrontation between the EPA police and Waste Management. If you start in your 24 hours to try to photograph and protest this, they actually will have you stalked by mob heavies who will threaten your life, and that will give you a kind of authentic Chicago experience. And then next to that, cheek by jowl with that, is the landfill where Chicago's garbage was dumped for 100 years, and it's been covered with grass, and it is now the kind of golf course. Bill Clinton helicopters in to play golf on that golf course. So I think you have the wealthy, the nature, the industry, and the ordinary people of the South Side just all living there. And when I take a stranger to the city, I always take them down there because you can't see everything that is Chicago all in one place like that anywhere else. Then where would you eat? Oh, when I first moved to Chicago, there was one restaurant people went to. It was the Black Hawk, and that was where you went for prime rib. Now, it's pretty much what your fancy is. I would send you up to Devon Avenue, 6400 North, the whole other end of the city from Dead Stick Pond, and that's where the Pakistani and Indian immigrants have all of these amazing little storefront restaurants where it's just their cuisine, and if you at all like experimental and if you like spicy, I love it. I love Indian cooking. That would be great. My go-to place, and it's not maybe a VI kind of place, but it's a restaurant across from Oprah's studios called Sardine. It's just, I think of it as my Cheers. It's a French restaurant. It's a bistro. It's very laid back and casual, and it's a place where you go in and everybody knows your name, and you can sit at the bar and have some great wine and eat, and so that's where you'll find me most Monday nights, except when the Bears are playing the Packers.
Oh, so how do you feel about the Bears and the Packers?
Oh, well, you know, Bears and Packers. No, I couldn't believe it. I had to go to bed in the third quarter because I was getting up early to fly up here, and I was sure that the Pack was just going to smear the Bears. And I woke up and I thought, I'm in a state of disbelief.
Well, do you want to share your the recollection you had about how everyone can be safe forever flying?
Okay, I get the Wall Street Journal every day, and one of the things I like about it, they do great investigative reporting, but they always have a little just oddball story in it, the kind of thing that Jon Stewart might cover or that would be on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell. So about 10 years ago, 4 Green Bay Packer fans were flying their own little plane back from a game, and of course they were Packers, they won. I wonder what it's like to live in a city where you just know your team is always going to win. But anyway, they were feeling no pain, and they had their cheese heads on, and the plane crashed. And they all survived with minor injuries. I mean, broken legs and things like that, but no spinal cord injuries, no head injuries, because they had their cheese heads on. And ever since then, when I fly and they start doing the safety briefing, I want them to say, in the event of an emergency, a cheese head will descend from the compartment. I would feel so much safer than that little oxygen mask.
Well, I just wanted to add, Rebecca, wherever you are, you can see Doug Stanton when this is over, and I'm sure that he'll give you an all-expense-paid trip to Chicago. You can just talk to him and work those details out, and I'm sure that can be arranged. So, talking about fans, so you're in Hyde Park, which is a near-south neighborhood, And yet you're a North Siders fan, you're a Cubs fan, not the Sox.
This is a complicated story. In the first place, as you know, great art is built on suffering. And why would I root for a team where I can't suffer? In the second place, I grew up in the country in rural Kansas. I went to a 2-room country school. I played third base for the Kaw Valley District 95 team, and we were always massacred by Wakarusa number 6, which is where Rex Stout went to school, by the way. He grew up in the same part of Kansas that I did just many years earlier. And I, as a child, had a very powerful arm. I could throw the distance from third to first, but I had no aim, and so we were often spending recess looking for our ball, our one ball in the cornfield next to the school. So I kind of feel like not just am I born to be a Cubs fan, I am born to be a Cubs player. But above all, the summer that I came to Chicago and was working with these kids, we were really cheek by jowl with Comiskey Park, and the White Sox would not even return our phone calls, and the Cubs would give us free tickets to the games every Thursday. And as many of you know, the definition in Chicago of an honest politician is one that stays bought. So the Cubs bought my loyalty all those years ago, and I've been paying for it ever since.
Well, you said you were from Kansas and then you arrived in Chicago. Tell us about 1966, the summer that you met Chicago.
I was 19 years old, and the whole country was alight in those years with civil rights demonstrations and anti-demonstrations. And I just felt events were happening on the big stage, and I was in Kansas, and I wanted to be part of a bigger universe. They put up a notice for volunteers. I always try to remember how we got information before the internet. We all knew when there was an anti-war demonstration. We would get to Washington, there'd be 100,000 of us on the mall, but how did we know? We didn't text each other. Anyway, I answered the call, and the civil rights leadership in Chicago knew that it was going to be a very volatile summer because Martin Luther King had come to the city and had moved into one of the tenements there to try to give support to the local civil rights movement. They couldn't get any traction in dealing with, really, Chicago had written covenants restricting African Americans to certain segments that they deliberately turned into ghettos, and that's a long story that I won't rant about tonight. But they wanted to embed volunteers in some of the most volatile neighborhoods to try to work with kids and start from the ground up in trying to both control violence in the neighborhoods and change attitudes. So that summer it changed my life forever. I mean, it made me committed to the city. It made me committed more than I had been to social justice. It gave me a new appreciation for the ways that big events affect individuals, hurt them in many ways. I was working with kids in a mostly Polish-Lithuanian neighborhood who were just bewildered. They were victimized by banks, by realtors, their families were. They had no power and no control. I didn't have any empathy or sympathy or support for the riots and the violence that they took part in, but I had a lot of sympathy for the helplessness that they felt. And all of those things, it was a long time before I started writing for publication. I used to write very privately for myself, but they all kind of came together to help create my character when I finally did start writing.
V.I. has a very strong sense of social justice. Are there other traits that she has that you feel you share, such as, I think you said more than once something about impulse control?
I thought we were talking about puppies at lunch. Yeah, V.I. and I both have a little problem with impulse control. The difference between us is that she can back it up in ways that I can't. I get in over my head, and then I think, oh, when will I ever learn? Actually, V.I. says the same thing. In Critical Mass, there's one scene where she used to date a Chicago cop, a guy named Conrad Rawlings, and he tells her, don't go into this drug house until my pal gets there. And she goes in. Of course she goes in because one thing leads to another. And then as she's in the middle of it all, she thinks, impulse control, when will I ever learn?
Well, do you feel that over the course of reading the different books in the series, though, I feel like she does exercise impulse control. Like, she'll have these contemplative moments where she'll say, in another time or place I might have acted, but I held my tongue. And does that reflect what you have also found?
I think I've learned over the years that it's good to save your energy for the most important fights that you have. I don't know if I should tell this story or not. At the risk of alienating half the audience, I will say that the day that Bill Gates' fortune hit $100 billion, I was in Seattle on tour and did a live interview on public radio. And they said, what would you do if you had $100 billion? And I said, I would buy Texas and give it back to Mexico. Afterwards, my husband said, you get in enough trouble for things that you really care about. Why did you have to say that?
Well, Victoria Iphigenia Warshawski, that is a mouthful. What is the genesis of that incredible name?
V.I. Warshawski. I always say girl detective because I think of Nancy Drew, who's always referred to as the girl detective. When I first started thinking about V.I., I had had a wish for a long time, 8 years before I wrote the first book, to create a woman private eye who turned the tables, who remade the roles of women, but I didn't have confidence that I could actually write. And so what I was doing, I would try these things that were really little parodies of Raymond Chandler that didn't go anywhere. And then one day, a day much like today, a dreary fall day, I worked for CNA Insurance in Chicago. I worked for a guy who was just not, let's just say he was not a good man. He had his little ways. I would say his only good quality was that he was as awful to the men who worked for him as he was to the women. He was not a sexist. So my lips are saying, gosh, Fred, heck of an idea. And the balloon over my head is saying, Fred, you unspeakable piece of unspeakableness. And in that moment, V.I. really came to me. I thought, I don't want a parody of Philip Marlowe. I want a woman like me and my friends. She's doing a job that didn't exist for us, for women, when we were growing up, when my generation was growing up. But she says what's in the balloon because she doesn't care about making knives. She doesn't care if she gets fired. And then I had my persona, V.I., the non-impulse controlling P.I., but I needed a name, and Chicagoans are really obsessed with their place of national origin. To this day, people will say, where are you from? And I'm thinking they say, well, I grew up in Kansas, but Chicago's been, no, they'll say, where are you from? Meaning, what poverty-stricken square foot of Europe did my ancestors flee? And so she had to have some ethnic identity, and I knew I couldn't write believably about African American or Latino or really even Irish experience. And one of my grandfathers came from Poland. I thought, well, Warsaw, that's in Poland. Warshawski, that must be a Polish name. And then the initials just came to me. That's why I always call her V.I., because I wrote about her for 6 months before I came up with names for her. And poor thing, what was I thinking of to give her those names?
Well, you have another wonderful character who lives downstairs from her, Mr. Contreras, who likes to call her doll and cookie and things like that. Now, is there symbolic aspect to that name? Because sometimes he is a contrarian, and was that intentional?
You know, I didn't think it through the way I thought through V.I.'s name, so I'm not sure why I called him that. The name is Spanish, but he's Italian because there's a lot of Spaniards in Naples and vice versa. He makes his own horrible grappa that tastes like gasoline, but he's very proud of it. But when I worked for the insurance company, when I worked for the insurance company, I had an agent on Long Island, a guy named Russ. And when Russ called, you knew that was the rest of your morning, because once he started talking, he went on for a year or two. And he would always call me doll or cookie, which normally I would hate that, but it felt so, it was like he was talking to his daughter, or it wasn't meant in a put down or condescending or sexually obnoxious way. It just felt comfortable and right coming from him. And so when Mr. Contreras appears in the fourth book, along with the dog, and actually, Mr. Contreras had a cat in that book, and I completely forgot about it. The cat has just... Somebody wrote me recently and said, "What happened to Mr. Contreras' cat?" And, he gave it to his daughter, Ruthie. It's living in Hoffman Estates. But anyway, I started channeling Russ, and then I got really tired of Mr. Contreras going on and on and on and on, as I am doing right now in a very tiring way. So in the sixth book, I shot him. I was going to kill him. But Courtney, my husband, was outraged and jumped in front of the bullet and deflected it into Mr. Contreras' shoulder.
Well, I've also enjoyed, over the course of the series, seeing how you integrated technology and realizing that in the earlier books, sometimes she got into trouble because there were no cell phones. And she was having to call into her answering service and do all these sorts of things that, and then as they progress, she has a cell phone, and so have you looked back over the arc of your books and thought about how technology got her in or out of some of the problems she experienced?
Pre-cell phones and internet, private investigators, at least in fiction, led much more dynamic and dramatic lives. It's really a challenge in the technological world to have the detective be in motion. All the things that she used to do in City Hall and the old records office are now available online. In one book, one of the early books with cell phones, I had her battery run down, but that seemed really cheap and cheesy to me. But lately, because in Critical Mass and also in the previous book, Breakdown, she's grappling with the fact that both the government and sophisticated high-tech companies actually can easily hack into your cell phone and track you wherever you are. And there are places where she has to be quite aware of this and has to go dark in order to be able to circumvent the people who are trying to thwart her. So in a way, the surveillance age is making it possible for the detective once again to have a lot more motion and physicality. I do sometimes wonder about the file that the NSA has on me, because in Critical Mass, there's a detailed description of a meth lab and all the things that you need to make methamphetamines, and I'm thinking, I don't know how to do this. I had to look it all up online, and therefore the NSA knows that I know. It's like, I've downloaded the Anarchist's Handbook for advice on how to make bombs out of ammonia and old newspapers. So far, I haven't been stopped at the border, but let's not talk about this because I'm being recorded tonight.
Well, V.I. also likes nice cars, and her cars get better and better as the series goes. Do you also like nice cars?
Okay, I have a 1995 red Jaguar convertible, which is my most prized possession, so much so that I have not known whom to leave it to in my estate plan. I finally decided, my second stepson, who's a machinist and He takes apart his computer when it doesn't work and remills the hard drive. He's very green. He doesn't own a car. He makes handmade knives for a living and does custom sharpening. So I've left the car to him because although he might never drive it, he would give it a better engine than...
Well, sometimes you take a break from VI, and you have written other novels, short stories, essays. How do these breaks change you when you come back to VI?
I've written 2 novels that aren't in the series. One's called Ghost Country, and it's sort of a magic realism novel set in the homeless community or the homeless world in Chicago. And the other, Bleeding Kansas, takes place in the part of rural, I cannot say the word rural Kansas, the country where I grew up. And both of these were stories that I really wanted to tell that didn't seem to be stories that could be told in VI's voice. And I really think both times that I took a break from her, I came back and wrote about her in a better and fresher, deeper way.
And she's hovering right around 50, isn't she?
She is. Oh. When I started the series, I wanted to age her in real time. I was a big fan of the early Spencer novels, not so much the later ones, but Spencer was a Korean War veteran, and that was important in the early books, and then he didn't age, and it began to seem more and more kind of ludicrous to me. And I thought, well, V.I., who she is, her whole life is shaped by the major events of the 20th century. Her mother was a refugee from Mussolini's Italy. Her mother was Jewish. And V.I. came of age in the great social justice movements of the 70s. I'm sorry. But that was before I was aging, before I got creaky. And, you know, I used to look at my mother and think, oh, well, if you only looked after yourself, you wouldn't. And, you know, the evil eye, even more than the NSA, follows your thoughts and comes back and bites you. So I did not want V.I. struggling to get around the way I sometimes struggle to get around. I wanted her to still be active and sexy and leap tall buildings at a single bound and get in over her head because of her lack of impulse control and then fight her way out of it again. So I decided against all of my principles that she would hover around the age of 50 for a while. If I live to be 80 and am still writing, maybe 60 will start seeming. And then I thought, I'm also at an age where I suffer a lot of loss in my life, as I'm sure many of you do too. And I wanted to keep my fictional world a safe place, not a place of loss. So Lottie Herschel definitely should not be in the operating room anymore, but she will be. She will continue to do that work. I think Mr. Contreras is about maybe 180 now, but he's still going to grab that pipe wrench, and he is not going to suffer from dementia or any of the other terrible things that I see the older people in my life suffering from. And the dogs are just going to stay 5 forever.
Well, speaking of her needing to stay healthy because she's so scrappy, I mean, she gets into a lot of physical encounters with people. She karate chops bad guys and flies across warehouses on cranes and does all kinds of really cool things. So tell us about a similar VI moment that you had with a home invader, a potential...
Oh, gosh. Nancy, I think, was recording all of my babbling at lunch. So we live on the south side of Chicago, and we live in an old Victorian house, brick house. And I came home one day, pulled into my driveway, and saw 2 kids climbing a tree to get into a second-floor window. And I leaped out of the car, my keys in my hand. They jumped down from the tree. I was coming up the tree after them, and they jumped down. And I chased them. I guess it was about half a mile. And then they disappeared into this kind of warren of public housing, and I suddenly thought, ooh, maybe I ran a little bit further than I needed to. Meanwhile, my neighbors are crossing the street to get away from me. They're not calling the police or coming to my help. They're like, no, she's demented, get out of the way. And so I streaked back home, and I saw the palm of my hand had been cut to ribbons by my keys. I was so angry and clutching them so tightly. And so I knew that in a fight, the adrenaline, you do not feel the pain. You feel it after the fight. You don't feel it in the middle of the fight. And it kind of helped with when I write about V.I.'s fight scenes. You know, she keeps going. It's afterwards that she's stiff and sore, and Lottie needs to shoot her full of phenylbutazone or something like that. And in critical mass, she comes to Lottie. She has to get going, and she wants some steroids injected into her. And Lottie is just totally fed up. She says, first of all, you have to do that in the hospital. You have to have an x-ray over you. It's not something I can do in your living room. And secondly, you have to recover from that. And you can't just leap up again. And of course, V.I. does bully her into at least getting a muscle relaxant, and then she doesn't leap up again because she's pretty groggy, but she does get up again.
Well, some other things that I've noticed, you have a lot of really interesting and complex white-collar crime, bank fraud, insurance things going on, just all sorts of really interesting kind of bad guys that are at high level, and then you sort of have the goons below it that are trying to beat up V.I. in her apartment and things like that. You have an MBA. Did your education help you do some of these complex financial crimes?
I have an MBA that I got at the University of Chicago, and it's a very mathematically oriented MBA program, and I did not do well in it, although they did give me the degree. I wouldn't say that per se helped me, but I worked in the financial sector in insurance for 10 years, and I read the journal every day, and I see a lot of these crimes are so complicated I can't follow them. And I'm in awe, like the state of California just levied a $15 million fine on one of the Koch brothers' shadowy, subterranean, yeah, go Jerry Brown, organizations that, and I read the story 3 times, and I still don't exactly follow it, but they have a network of foundations which are not for profit but are used because of the Citizens United decision. They can use them to funnel money into political campaigns, and they just kite money from one fund to the other depending on the state and the state regulations. So I follow that kind of crime, and V.I. That's the universe that she operates in. I don't know what else to say about that, but except that financial fraud, to my mind, I mean, street crime, I'm terrified of street crime. Street crime damages lives, it destroys families, there's no doubt about it. It's awful. And I live in a city where children are murdered every day in random shootings, and I think it's terrible, and people do write about that. A lot of mystery writers set their books in that milieu. But I think if you want to do large-scale damage, you do it as a white-collar criminal. You know, like when the savings and loan industry was deregulated, Charles Keating, who owned one of the big S&Ls, targeted his elderly depositors. He found out everyone who was 70 and over, sent out 10,000 letters telling people that his junk bonds were as secure and as safe as the federally insured certificates of deposit they had. And people lost their life savings. People committed suicide. People went to jail. Elderly people were in jail for shoplifting to feed themselves after he destroyed their lives. And to me, the scale of that is enormous and outrageous, and to the extent that VI can grab hold of a small part of that tiger's tail and make a few lives whole again, then those stories need to be told. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I know another issue that you feel strongly about is women in the writing profession. And would you take a minute to just talk to us about Sisters in Crime? I know that's something you're very proud of, and you should be.
When I started writing, when my first book was published, I didn't have big sales. It sold 3,500 copies, but I was very fortunate to be very well reviewed. And that made the difference in my having a career, frankly, and being here tonight. Today, in today's publishing world, they expect you to sell 27,000 hardcover or the equivalent books in order to clear the gate to do a second book. But when I started, the bar was much lower. 2,500 of those copies were sold to libraries. And libraries make their buy decision even today based on how many national reviews you get, whether it's print or online today. So if you're not getting reviewed, libraries aren't seeing you're there, and libraries are still the biggest single buyer of books for every writer except the people like Grisham or Cornwell who are selling millions of copies. So I started hearing, though, from other women as I got to know writers as I went to national meetings. Other women were not as fortunate as I was, or Sue Grafton also published her first book in the same year. And I think it's because Sue and I were doing something that was perceived as masculine, even though we were doing genre-bending, role-changing books. They were still noir, private eye, could be seen as part of that world. So Sisters in Crime, I was hearing from a lot of women who were, it used to be if you went to a National Crime Writers Conference, there was a panel of women writers and then everything else was discussed by men. And we were just starting to hear a lot about these kinds of issues. One woman went to a crime conference and the man on the panel with her said, "What do you do when your kitty cat gets on your keyboard?" And it's like, who needs that? So in 1986, at the big crime convention, the BoucherCon in Baltimore, I hosted a breakfast to see if there was enough interest in these problems to organize, and 26 people came, and out of that, Sisters in Crime grew. The first thing that we did was to do a monitor of all of the national review outlets. We had volunteers who just tracked the books that were reviewed by men versus by women. We got the number of books published that year in the crime fiction field, and we found that adjusting for the numbers, men were publishing about 60% of the crime novels. A book by a man was 7 times more likely to be reviewed than a book by a woman. And we thought, well, maybe men write twice as well as we do, but we don't think they write 7 times as well as we do. So we went to the industry. We couldn't be confrontational because we need them. We need the review outlets. We need the publishers. But we just started doing it by education. We did a books in print. We went directly to libraries. We went directly to bookstores. We really changed the landscape of the publishing world. We grew the mystery. We brought women readers back into the mystery who had abandoned it because there weren't books that they could read and identify with. Men started liking the way that women were depicted and playing roles, and men started writing about interesting women. And so, yeah, I am very proud of this because I think that the work that we did, and I started the organization, but a lot of women did a lot of hard work. Linda Grant and Carolyn Hart did the books in print. it just, the work that we've done has really, it's helped the genre, it's helped the industry, it's helped readers. It saved the economy, it ended war.
So, Sarah, do you have obviously a female protagonist. Do you simply have a female protagonist, or do you consider yourself a feminist writer?
I consider myself a writer who is a feminist, and I try, when I'm writing, to think empathically about all of my characters, even those who take positions that are very different from my own. I'm not always successful at it. Sometimes I think the books that I have the most regrets about are the ones where the characters who don't share my outlook are treated too two-dimensionally. This is what I think you need to be a good writer. You need to love language. You need to love playing with words. You need to read a lot because that's your raw material. You need to be willing to face your own shortcomings. I think of writing fiction as a form of autosurgery. The closer you can cut to your own bone, the more authentic your voice will be. And you have to develop an empathy for yourself and for the people around you. I think my writing is a work in progress. I would like to be a better writer than I am. I would like to be freer and write more poetically and all these things, but these are the things that I think you need to be a good writer. I think someone like Saul Bellow, who had an incredible gift of language, to me his books are unreadable because his anger and his lack of empathy for everyone, it distorts them and turns them into screeds. And I don't want to write like that myself, and sometimes I do, and then I'm not writing well.
Who do you enjoy reading?
I read many different, mostly fiction. I read nonfiction more when I'm doing research. Right now I'm reading Louise Erdrich's The Roundhouse and just loving it, admiring the prose. I think two books that I think of that I read recently that are in the last 5 years, Marilyn Robinson's Gilead and Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. They both were books that just, I wish I'd written them myself. I mean, I'm so in awe and so envious of, they're two very different achievements, but in both of them, the language, the characters, the way the books are worked out are close to perfect in my mind.
Well, let's transition to critical mass. And would you like to tell us something about some of the travels and research that you had to do? Where did it take you, and what did you find while you were writing it?
A lot of the work that I did was just very much out of books. I'm married to a particle physicist. Courtney served with great gallantry in the Second World War as a member of the Royal Navy. He saw action at Normandy and elsewhere. But at the war's end, he came to the United States and did a PhD in physics at Berkeley, and then was brought to the University of Chicago by Enrico Fermi, and was a protege of Fermi's, and through him met many of the people, most of the people who worked on the Manhattan Project. So when I came into his life a number of years later, it was my privilege to meet a lot of those people. And yeah, the horrible thing at the end of the road is the bomb, but the excitement that physicists, the ones that I knew, feel when they're wholly engaged in this work. It's something that, on our first date, Courtney tried to explain special relativity to me. And what made me fall in love with him was how alive he was. This wasn't work to him. This was something beyond joy. It was where his heart was, and he wanted me to share that. And for a long time after I started writing, I wanted to try to put that on the page. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but I'll try to make this shorter. So, but it took me a long time to get characters in a story that would make that possible. And critical mass is the end of a lot of thinking, playing with ideas, and creating a physicist who had her career in Vienna in the 1930s. I'm going to say just a little bit more about that, and then I'm going to shut up and read a little. As I learned, I started learning just in a fortuitous way about an institute in Vienna that was part of the University of Vienna, where 40% of the research staff before World War II were women. And this was because the director of the institute cared so much about having women involved in science. His own most frequent collaborator was a woman. And he brought these women in. The university wouldn't pay them. He paid them out of his own pocket. When Hitler came in, of course, all of the Jews at the institute either had already fled or had to flee or were killed. And the women had to go home because the Nazis didn't believe in women working outside the home. So Vienna has never recovered from this. The university has never recovered from this. It's still a place where people move and think very cautiously. I went there. The director of the institute today talked about this very frankly, that even 70 years after the war, that's still the big cloud over how creative, that is, they don't feel creative. They go overseas to do work, but in their institute, they feel still very cautious and not risk-taking in science. So I spent time there. I imagined having a chase scene there. I knew where it was going to be. I wrote it all out. It's some of the worst writing I ever have done. And I kind of realized that my action scenes had to be in Chicago. My background scenes had to be in Vienna. I went to the Leopoldstadt, which is an island off of Vienna where a lot of Jews historically lived. It's where Billy Wilder, the director, film director, grew up. Freud was born there. A lot of people were there, but the Nazis turned it into a ghetto. And I have photographs on my own webpage of the building that I chose for where Lottie Herschel's family was forced to move and live. It's now a big Turkish neighborhood. I also had to get naked in the Vienna airport. As I went through security on my way out, the underwire on my bra set off the alarm. And they ran the wands over me. And that wasn't good enough. They took me into this cabin and told me to take off all my clothes. And you know, I don't think anyone would enjoy that. For a Jew in Vienna with people in uniform telling her to get naked, it was singularly uncomfortable. But I decided I really wanted to catch my plane, and so I didn't. I don't know what V.I. would have done.
So you've got a couple of excerpts for us to hear.
I'm going to read a little bit from the physicist that I created, and then I'm going to read a little bit from V.I.'s first chapter. There are about 8 or 10 segments in Martina's perspective, and the rest of it is in V.I.'s. And you'll tell me when I need to stop. Oh, the syllable is a soft cry of ecstasy. She has never seen colors like those on the floor, red running into orange, yellow, green. The purple is so rich, like grape juice, that she wants to jump into it. When she runs over to look, the colors disappear. Her mouth rounds with bafflement. She thought Frau Herschel had painted the rainbow on the floor. Then she sees it reappear on her arm. Against the starched white of her sailor's shirt, she can see the purple which the wooden floor had swallowed. She strokes it and watches the colors ripple on her hand. "Martina," her mother whispers, "your manners." She turns reluctantly and bobs a curtsy to Frau Herschel. Frau Herschel, by the way, is going to be Lottie Herschel's grandmother. Her black boots hold her ankles but later, this is 1913. Her black boots hold her ankles so stiffly that she can't move well and she almost falls. Her mother frowns, desperate for her awkward child to make a good impression on her employer. Birgit, the Kindermädchen, doesn't bother to hide a smirk. Little Sophie Herschel, who grows up to be Lottie's mother, little Sophie Herschel doesn't laugh, just pirouettes in her white slippers and sinks into a deep curtsy in front of Martina's mother. "I believe the child hasn't even noticed the rocking horse," Frau Herschel says, laughter barely covering her annoyance. "But Sophie will help her. You may leave her here in the nursery, Frau Saganor. You can go down to the sewing room to begin the white work. Birgit will feed Martina when she brings Sophie her lunch." The 6-year-olds are left to stare at each other. Later, the little girls will spend so much time together that they won't remember this first meeting. Not the meanness of Sophie flaunting one expensive toy after another, nor of the nursery maid Birgit giving Martina a piece of bread with goose fat for lunch, while Sophie has thick soup and an orange, nor of Martina upstaging Sophie by playing the flute for Signor Caparelli, the Italian who was teaching music to many of Vienna's bourgeois children. In later years, Martina remembers none of that, although the flute will always calm her. She remembers only the rainbow on the floor and the discovery that the cut glass in the nursery windows created it. The little segment that I'm going to read from V.I.'s part is in the present. Martina and Sophie Herschel grow up, their lives are intertwined, and when they both have daughters out of wedlock, Lottie and Martina's daughter, Kitty, the girls' lives are intertwined. They are not best friends when they are children, Lottie and Kitty, and when their lives reconnect in Chicago many years later, they don't like each other any better. But when Kitty gets into trouble, she turns to Lottie. She turns to her angrily. She resents the success Lottie's made of her life. Lottie feels guilty and responds. So Kitty has a daughter in her 50s who's a drug addict, and Lottie's in surgery when Kitty calls thinking that her daughter's life is being threatened. And V.I. is told by Lottie's clinic manager to go try to find the daughter. And V.I. ends up in a meth house. And I'm not going to describe all of that. It's in my NSA file. So she's been out in the country. She's gone through this house. I don't want to read too much in the
It's a good description, though.
Oh,
For all of you who like Breaking Bad, it's a really good, the whole meth things.
well, I'll read a little of it. I just don't want to
really
take
good.
up too much time. A house near the house where I grew up is kind of like this. I'm sorry. My brother just got a new dog, and he said they were deciding between a black lab, a golden lab, and a meth lab. The house was old and falling down. Glass had broken out or been shot out of most of the windows. Someone had nailed slabs of plywood over them, but hadn't put much effort into the job. In several places, the wood swung free, secured by only a couple of nails. The steel fence had revolving spikes on top to discourage trespassers like me. Signs warned of guard dogs, but I didn't hear any barking or snuffling as I walked the perimeter. It was behind a dilapidated shed that I found the opening I needed. Someone had been there before me with heavy steel cutters, taking out a piece of fence wide enough for a car to drive through. As I passed between the cuts, the skin on my neck prickled with something more than heat. I wished I'd brought my gun with me, but I hadn't known I was coming to a drug house when I left Chicago. Whoever cut the fence had dealt with the back door in a similarly economic way, kicking it in so that it hung on one hinge. The smell that rolled out the open door, metallic, like iron mixed with rotting meat, was all too easy to recognize. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and looked cautiously inside. A dog lay just beyond the doorway, his chest blown open. Some large caliber something had taken him down as he tried to protect the losers he lived with. Poor old Rottweiler. Your mama never meant you to guard a drug house, did she? Not your fault, boy. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong people. And she covers his body with a towel. When I stepped over him, it was into a kitchen from hell. A scarred wooden hutch, once painted white, was filled with spray cans of starter fluid, drain cleaner, jars part full of ugly-looking liquids, eyedroppers, Vicks inhalers, and gallon jugs labeled muriatic acid. A makeshift hood with an exhaust vent had been constructed over the hutch. I played my light around the room. It was hard to tell how much of the shambles had been caused by the dog killers and how much by the natives. I stepped over jugs that had been knocked to the floor, skirted a couple of plug-in heaters, and moved into the rooms beyond. It was an old farmhouse with a front room that had once been a formal parlor, judging by the remnants of decorative tiles around the empty fireplace. These had been pried out of the mantel and shattered. Someone had held target practice against an old roll-top desk. An angry hand had smashed the drawers and scattered papers around the floor. A staircase led to a second floor. Tucked underneath it was a stopped-up toilet. A better detective than I might have looked inside, but this smell told me more than I wanted to know. I climbed partway down the steep stairs to the basement, but a spider the size of my hand scuttling from my flashlight kept me from descending all the way. Most likely, if there had been anything to find in this ruined house, the dog's killers already had it. In my days with the public defender, I used to see this kind of destruction with depressing frequency. Most likely, the invaders had been hunting for more drugs, or they felt the dealers had done them out of something. The addicts I worked with would have traded their mother's wedding ring for a single hit and then come back to shoot up the place so they could retrieve their jewelry. I'd represented one woman who killed her own son when he couldn't get back the ring he'd traded for a rock of crack. I was skirting the fence, heading back to the road, when I heard a faint whimper from the collapsed shed. I pushed my way through weeds and rubble and pulled apart the siding. Another Rottweiler lay there. When it saw me, it feebly thumped its stub of a tail. I bent slowly. It made no effort to attack as I felt its body. A female, painfully thin, she'd gotten tangled in a mess of old ropes and fence wires. She'd panicked and worked herself deep into the makeshift net. I slowly pried the wires away from her chest and legs. When I moved away and squatted, hand out, she got to her feet to follow me, but collapsed again after a few steps. I went to my car for my water bottle and a rope. I poured a little water over her head, cupped my hand so she could drink, tied the rope around her neck. Once she was rehydrated, she let me lead her slowly along the fence to the road. But when we reached my car, she wouldn't get in. I tried to lift her, but she growled at me, bracing her weak legs in the weeds along the verge. I dropped the rope and watched as she staggered across the gravel. At the cornfield, she sniffed among the stalks until she found what she was looking for. She headed into the corn but was so weak that she kept falling over. How about if you stay here and let me find what you're looking for? She looked at me skeptically, not sure a city woman could find her way through a field, but unable to go on herself. The stalks were higher than my head, but they were brown and dry and didn't provide any shield from the sun. All around me, insects zinged and stung. Prairie dogs and a snake slipped away at my approach. The plants were set about a yard apart, the rows appearing the same, no matter what direction I looked. It would have been easy to get lost, except I was following a trail of broken stalks toward the spot where crows continued to circle. The body was splayed across the corn like a snow angel. Crows were thick around the shoulders and hands, and they turned on me with savage cries. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, we would love to turn this over to you now and have some question and answers. My eyes are trying to adjust. That's wonderful. Right. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we have people with microphones. They'll come over, and then if you could stand and tell us your name and then state your question for Sara, please.
Hello, my name's Lynn. I have always wondered what you thought about this, and I never thought I'd have a chance to ask. What about Kathleen Turner?
What about
her?
Kathleen Turner and the V.I Warshawski movie? Well, I went through the predictable stages of denial, anger, acceptance. The movie was, in some ways, a good experience for me. It brought my books to readers who had never heard of them, and especially in the Far East, it made a difference in introducing readers to VI. It just wasn't a good movie, and the hard part is that I didn't realize when I signed the contract that I had given the rights in perpetuity to Disney, and Disney doesn't want to do anything with them, and they don't want to give them up. So the mouse is being a bit of a rat. But I will say there were two moments in the filming that were really great. One of them was that Disney rented Wrigley Field for a day's shooting, and you are not allowed on those sacred grounds. You just aren't. And I got to be on the grass at Wrigley Field. It was in the days when Andre Dawson was playing right field. I got to kiss the ground where Andre Dawson's feet had stood. And then movies are a lot like police work. You just sit around waiting, and then there's a brief flurry of action, and then you wait more. So they had extras in the stand, and I was just horsing around like, as I was doing at the start of this program, singing opera on the stage. I decided to run the bases. And the extras were just glad that there was something going on, so they were cheering. It was night, the lights are on. I'm running the bases at Wrigley Field under the lights. And I got to home plate, and I wanted to slide. I don't know how to slide, so I just fell onto home plate. And I thought, I get it. I get why athletes don't retire. Here I am. I'm not athletic, and yet that cheering, I would have gone on forever to hear those cheers. So there was that moment, which was wonderful, and then a funny moment where some big studio chief, it wasn't Michael Eisner, but someone at just the next level below, came in to see how the filming was going, watched the day's shooting, and came out and said, feminism might be commercially viable. And I don't know, that was kind of worth hearing. But Jeff Lurie, the producer, he could have made a good movie, and he didn't. He made a bad movie. Jeff Lurie now owns, this is how petty and impotent I am. Jeff Lurie owns the Philadelphia Eagles. I watch him in the owner's box during Eagles games, and he's gotten kind of round and shiny the way people are when they've been on expense accounts too long. And I think, yeah, you're going to have a heart attack one of these days, Jeff Lurie. That's going to teach you a thing or two. And the other thing I do is I don't care who the Eagles are playing, even if they're playing the Cowboys. I root for whoever is playing the Eagles. And, yeah, serve you right, Jeff Lurie. Your team just lost again. So that is how impotent I am and was in the face of what Disney did to V.I. Now, aren't you glad you asked?
We are.
Hi, I'm Peter. I wanted to ask about the comment you made about empathy and good writing being based on empathy, partially because I'm a big Bello fan, so I, have to stick up for him a little bit.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Sorry,
There we go.
let me restate my question. I wanted to ask about your comment about empathy, in part because I'm a big Bello fan, so I feel like I have to stick up for him a little bit since he's dead now and can't do it himself. In part, though, because I have sort of two qualms about that description. The first is a literary qualm or a literary historical qualm. Don't we also then have to give up a whole slew of other writers? I mean, don't we have to give up Dostoevsky in large part? Don't we have to give up George Eliot and her anger at a gender inequality? Don't we have to give up large portions of Homer? Don't we have to give up Dante in large part in the Inferno? Don't we have, isn't there a large...
I think I understand now what you're saying.
Okay. And then, but there's a political component too that I want to ask you about. I mean, especially given that you've written a dissertation on moral philosophy, and you must know this critique too. But I mean, isn't the idea that empathy and that coming to agreement through some kind of dialogue, this seems like a problematic idea, especially after the New York Times, for example, refuses to call torture torture. So
well, I can't really speak for the New York Times, but. It's a very long and complex question, but to try to distill it, Peter wished I hadn't made the comments that I'd made. I'm sorry, was it about Parker or Bello?
I think Bello.
Bello. I think that when rage gets in the way of creating believable characters, then you're doing a disservice both to your art and to your reader. And everyone is going to react differently to every writer. Peter really admires and likes Saul Bellow, and I don't. But obviously, many people agreed with Peter because they gave him a Nobel Prize. Although when Toni Morrison was given the Nobel Prize, Saul Bellow made public comments on how she wasn't a good writer and that wasn't a deserved prize. So everyone has a different reaction to every writer that they read. But George Eliot's books, for instance, I think the character of Mr. Casaubon, he is not a lovable and likable character, but you understand his personality. And so I think that writing about an unattractive character and making him believable is a real artistic triumph for whoever the writer is. I have a friend in England, I think one of the most under-recognized, really fine crime writers of my generation, Liza Cody, great writer. She wrote a series of books about a woman wrestler, Eva. The first book, Monkey Wrench, was she took a character who was unsympathetic in every way, a big, fat, talk about someone without impulse control, a woman who was all id, and made her her central figure. And by the end of the book, you are weeping for this character who is on the surface the least attractive and least likable person you could meet. And so when I think of needing the gift of empathy as a writer to create believable characters that the reader can respond to, I really think of Liza and what she did with Eva Wiley in Monkey Wrench.
There's a question here.
I've got a loud voice.
Could you stand?
This is neither a complex observation or question. You're a marvelous reader.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm wondering, have you considered recording any of your books, or perhaps you have and I just haven't run across it yet?
That's a very generous comment, asking whether I've recorded any of my books. I would love to record my books. The problem is that despite my histrionics, I'm not I don't have vocal training. And when they record, first of all, I would have to audition along with any other actor who wanted to read the books, and I might not get the part. That would be disheartening. But you have to rent studio space. I mean, they do it 8 hours at a time, and you just read for those 8 hours until the book is done. And I don't have the vocal training to keep off my vocal cords and keep my voice going long enough to read a whole book in that kind of chunk. I'm sorry, what?
I said I heard you singing.
But I do sometimes read excerpts and post them as sound bites on my website. That's the best I can do right now. Thank you. That's a very generous comment.
Well, the question is, I think it was on your official website. There's a picture of you, younger, writing at what looked like a card table in a corner. Where's your physical setting these days? Are you still in the corner?
Where do I write? The third floor of our house, it used to be an unfinished attic. We converted into my office, and yes, my card table days are behind me. That was right after my stepson started moving out. I took over one of their bedrooms for an office, and then somehow the operation kept growing, and now I have a real office with a built-in desk, and which you can sometimes see after I get fed up with all the papers on it and tidy it up for a while.
Did you choose the person who does do your reading?
No, I'm sure that there are writers who want to be really involved in the production process, but I feel like I just have limited time and energy, and so I let all that go to. Brilliance Audio has been a really good and generous partner to me in my work over the years, and I'm happy to let them make those decisions.
Other questions?
Hi. I have a teeny little question about your location in
Could
Kansas.
you tell us your name?
Oh, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, because I'm curious because I spent a lot of time in Kansas since my mom and her family and all were from a lovely cornfield area out in rural Kansas. Whereabouts were you?
Where in Kansas am I from? I come from near Lawrence, in between Lawrence and Kansas City. I have not a good sense of direction. For 10 years, I would tell people who wanted directions to our house that it was 5 miles east of town on 15th Street. And then I would go into town and get completely lost because I really thought that we were south of town. I was orienting myself. And never mind, that's a long, boring story.
Let me ask you the other part of my question then. Would you say that you are living your fantasy life?
Am I living my fantasy life? I think everybody's life has a lot of different stresses in it. I've had a very fortunate life with a man who's been a wonderful and supportive partner to me. I have a great dog. I have a granddaughter who's made it to 20 in good shape, and we're very proud of her. There are many just things that are also stressful. My husband's in poor health, and so that's a stressor, and there are things that are not as fantastic as they would be in my perfect life. I always wonder why people say, when you complain about getting old, they say, well, it's better than the alternative. I don't think the alternative is being dead. I think the alternative is being young and fit.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes, up in the balcony.
First of all, I'm Bonnie, and I love your books, and I love, thank you. And I love VI's lack of impulse control. I just admire that so much and aspire to it, but not very much. But I wanted to know if you could say something about VI's friendships with women and how, just something about that in the books, and how your reflection on how that, what shaped your depiction of her friendships with women. And
Especially
lack of.
Lottie, right? I mean, that's
Well,
just
Lottie
such
in
a-
particular, and then I don't know about others.
Sal, the bartender.
Yeah.
The question had to do with VI and her friendships. I grew up in a pretty lonely way. We lived in the country. There was a lot of violence in our family, and so we lived the kind of isolated life that people in violent families often do live. I had 4 brothers. I didn't have sisters or friends that I could spend time with. And so I think in some ways VI's friendships are out of my fantasy life for what it would have been like to, I mean, VI's an only child, but she has a lot of close bonds. Her cousin Boom Boom, the hockey star, now dead sadly, you make these decisions and then you think, why? Later on you think, why? Boom Boom would be such a great part of her life if he was still alive. But too late now. And so she has a network of connection that I guess I yearn for. A lot of times you write about the things that you wish were part of your life that aren't part of your life. Yeah, she was the only child. She got all the attention. She didn't have to share it with 4 siblings. Her dog Peppy is so well behaved. I mean, her dog Peppy is unbelievably well behaved. Never has to be on a leash. Her dog Peppy would not have near-death experiences running into a busy highway after a discarded pizza. Lottie, I think that's an intense relationship that grew out of the fact that VI lost her mother at a critical age. In the earliest books, in some ways, Lottie steps in, and she's older than VI. She plays more of that kind of maternal role, but as the books have progressed, it's become a role of equals, and especially in books like Critical Mass, where Lottie's very painful personal history plays a role. VI's care for her friend and ability to help her through rough times makes it a much more a relationship of equals. Was there another hand in the balcony? No.
I'm Deborah. I had the opportunity to meet you, listen to you, and enjoy your company in Springfield, Illinois, just last year when you spoke at our Women's Cancer Institute, or rather our Women's Power Lunch Against Cancer. And at that point in time, you told me that you and Courtney enjoyed so much your very short honeymoon and how much you love Sleeping Bear Dunes. And I'm sorry Courtney's ill. I don't know if he's here with you or not. Well, he's definitely here with you in spirit. And I'm wondering if, while you are here in Traverse City, you have had the time or will have the time to visit the Denos, it's the Art Center, is that right? The Denos Museum Center, which is very close to here and has a wonderful art exhibit right now on Sleeping Bear Dunes.
Oh, thank you both for remembering that we had a wonderful lunch in in Springfield, and thank you for remembering that. Sadly, I have to go on tomorrow and won't be able to enjoy the exhibit, but hopefully I'll be able to come back. I have a friend who spends her summers in Frankfurt. Franklin is the one down near Detroit, right? In Frankfurt, and I occasionally get to come up and spend a week with her, so I hope to get back to the dunes.
They are aren't they the most beautiful spot in the country?
I think they were
Wasn't it
named
officially?
that, weren't
Yeah,
they? Yeah.
it's official.
Oprah said so, it must be true.
Well, I think that concludes our evening. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that very generous interview.
So, Sarah, thank you so much. And we hope she comes back again, don't we?